What's up, my fellow artiste? Woo! Hope you're excited for this one. I'm excited. And if you're not excited, then get excited. We're drawing a lion, man. A big kitty cat. Now, we got to use another amazing photo from Charlotte Savely's portfolio that she has on Instagram. I'll drop a link to that in the description of this video, so if you want to check out what her portfolio is all about, you can totally do that. So in this one, it's a little different than other tutorials up until this point. Not so many defined lines. We'll have defined lines in the eyes of the lion, the nose, and the mouth, but pretty much everything else is going to be predominantly smudger work and brush work. So I'm excited to teach you guys some tricks that I use to really convey that soft, hairy look. And one last thing before we dive in is that we are on Patreon now, where we have exclusive content offerings. I'll drop a link to our Patreon page in the description of this video as well. So if you want to check out what we have to offer there, you can totally do that. Okay, let's hit it. Okay, so for this one, we're going to be using a graphite pencil and a hoo-hoo eraser, a Pentel Click eraser, and a Mono Zero eraser. We're also going to be using a 3/16 and a number 3 smudger, a sandpaper strip. We're also going to be using soft, medium, and hard charcoal pencils. A scratch piece of paper for checking our tones, and last but not least, the brush. Okay, so as with any drawing, we're going to look at the reference image and we are going to outline the basic shape of our image. So for this one, I'm going to start and I'm going to outline the mane of this lion, and then the basic shape of the mouth. And when it comes to your outlines, they don't have to be perfect. That's one of the reasons why we do them in graphite, is because it's much easier to erase, and you don't have to be nearly as committed to the graphite as you would be if you were trying to outline the basic shape of this lion with charcoal. But the big thing here is if you mess up like I just did here, just go ahead and hit it with your eraser, and that way you don't have to worry about it. But make sure that when you're doing your outlines, just press real light. You don't need to press hard at all. This is what I like to call framing my charcoal piece. Basically what I'm doing is I'm outlining the main lines of the image here. So in this case, the nose and the basic shape of the lion's eye. And then any tone breaks between dark tones and lighter tones in the image, I like to highlight those because darker tones, of course, will demand more charcoal. Lighter tones will demand little to no charcoal. So that's the reason why we are highlighting the tone breaks here. But the thing to note when it comes to your outlines, being that a lot of people tend to be kind of unsure of themselves when they're laying out their outlines, is just go into it knowing that if you mess up, you can erase it. Like here, I'm going to bring this mane in a little closer to the face with an eraser. Boom, done. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. That will allow you to kind of free up any hesitation that you might have and move forward. Okay, so now we're going to grind some soft charcoal and some medium charcoal onto our sandpaper strip here. Grab our tone check paper and get going. So being that the majority of this image is going to be implied lines as opposed to defined lines, we're going to start hitting this mane with some soft charcoal with our brush. And as you can see here, I'm going in and I am pulling the charcoal upward, and I'm also making sure to leave a light tone break in between each stroke on the mane.
This is just a base layer, so we're not committed here. But what we're going to be doing with this is, once we have this base layer drawn out, we are going to be going in with our Mono Zero eraser and basically adding by subtracting. So here we're going to take the eraser, we're going to stand it up on end, we're going to make sure that our tip is clean. And we're just going to do nice, strong pulls. The big thing with this technique here is to make sure that you start on the inside, pulling outward. And then, like I'm doing here, I'm coming from the outside and I'm pulling inward. And what this is doing is this is giving us a really nice, realistic look to the hair. This part of the mane is a little softer than the inside part of the mane, but the texture is still similar, and by doing this, we're giving it that realistic, layered look. But now what we're going to do here is we're going to take some more soft charcoal with our brush, and we're just very lightly touching the paper here, and we're conveying that form. We're pushing the mane back, while at the same time bringing the nose of this lion forward. And then when it comes to the main face of this lion, remember what I always say, we are focusing on the dark tones first. We want to make sure that we tackle those. Lighter tones can be blended to their appropriate look with some simple brushwork. And so that's one of the reasons why we only ever focus on dark tones when we are laying out our charcoal. So now here, when it comes to the Mono Zero eraser, you can start to do detail work right from the get-go. A lot of times when it comes to the hair on the face of lions and any kind of kitty cat, what you'll find is all you have to do is do nice tight strokes where you're essentially dabbing the paper with your eraser and you're doing really short pulls. And this gives you a nice texture of short hairs lying in unison with one another. This is kind of working backwards, but the majority of detail work, as you will see in this specific drawing, is going to be done mainly with eraser work. Okay, so now we're going to take our brush and we're just building up those darker tones. As you can see, there's this tone above the eye, and then there's a darker point in the forehead of this line here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a hard charcoal and I'm going to put one of the few defined lines in this drawing, and I'm going to outline the eye. One of the reasons why I start off with hard charcoal when it comes to my defined lines is because those lines are going to be very abrupt, very in your face, and because of that, I want to use the hard charcoal because it has the most amount of binder in it as opposed to soft and medium rated charcoals, and thus I know when I lay it down onto the paper, it is rich, it is the blackest of black, and it's going to really convey that line that I need it to convey. And now what I'm doing here is I'm going in with my 3/16 smudger, and I'm simply just pulling and softening up around the eye. If you look at the reference image, you can see that the inside of the eye is a very rich black, but then the outside of it is a softer, more lighter tone. And here's a quick little trick that you can do with the smudger. You can also lay it on top of charcoal that we've already laid down, and you can just do a quick little side pull. And basically what this does is this gives you much more control than the brush does. The brush is for moving extremely quickly. The smudger is for a more focused approach. And here, what I'm simply doing is I'm just going in and I'm just detailing out very softly, just layering that hard charcoal on top of the smudged charcoal within the eye and around the eye. And this gives it a nice realistic look, one that I like. And then here's another little trick you can do if you want to darken something up but still keep all those breaks that we put in with the Mono-Zero eraser. You can just go in and hit it real quick with a hard charcoal. And then we can hit it with a brush real quick, soften it up. This will give us a nice gradation across those tone breaks from light to dark space and give us a nice aesthetic, one that a lot of people like. But now, if you look at the reference image, what we're doing is we are going in and we are just throwing and moving a lot of charcoal very quickly. This is one of the reasons why I swear by the brush, especially if you're trying to make a lot of quality art in a short amount of time. I'm just going in and I'm hitting the darkest tones first. And then as you can see, when I pull that away from where I initially laid it down with the dark tone, it gives us a nice base layer, one that we can hit with eraser work and really bring that detail out in the lion's face. But here I'm just taking the hard charcoal and I am just putting it in a defined line. I'm doing exactly what I did with the left eye. I'm just building this eye up. I'm going slow, I'm taking my time. Cat eyes can tend to be a little tricky, but if you know how to approach them, you can nail it more often than not. But now I'm just taking my 3/16 smudger. I'm just pulling that charcoal around where it needs to be, giving this eye a nice round look, making it look like it's like the eyes are set in the head. There we go. Okay. And then here, if you just pull straight, you can see you can convey a really nice look, that shorter hair under the eye. And of course, we can continue to build these. But the detail work is just one of those things where you can detail the eyes out as much or as little as you want. The big thing to be mindful of is that you can overwork a cat eye. So just make sure that that's one of the reasons why I hit it with a hard charcoal and not a medium charcoal, and I don't mess around with soft charcoal. I go in, I line it out, I smudge out the hard charcoal, and then I highlight it real quick with some hard charcoal for detail work, and then that's it, I get out of there. Okay. Now what we're doing is we're just going in with our Mono-Zero eraser. And this is one of the reasons why I like to hit darker tones with my brush. Even though your tone might not look exactly like the reference image, because we're going in and we're kind of working backwards with our Mono-Zero eraser. What this allows us to do is this allows us to basically shape those darker tones so that they look more like our reference image. And then you can go in with your smudger, like I'm doing here, and you can more or less solidify those darker shadows and those darker tones that you need to make your drawing look more like the reference image. And now what we're doing is we're just simply going in. We're using our Mono-Zero eraser. We're doing nice short strokes. Remember, if you look at the reference image here in this one, all the hair on the lion's face is very short. Compared to all the hair in the mane, that hair progressively gets longer and longer. So when we're detailing out the face of the lion, we're just doing nice tight strokes, and this is the best approach that I have found with the 3-layered method of making the lion look as realistic as possible, as quickly as possible. Okay. So now we're just taking our brush and we're more or less just blending those darker tones, and this is giving certain areas of the drawing a really nice soft aesthetic versus being very, very abrupt and not looking very realistic at all. And then here, this is one of the reasons why I love the brush, is because I'm just able to go in, I'm able to hit all of my dark tones, pull all that charcoal from the dark tones over to the lighter tones, and I'm able to move a lot of charcoal very quickly. And because this is a lion, all of these lines are basically implied lines. The only defined lines are going to be in the eyes, the nose, and the mouth of this image, but everything else is going to be implied. And because of that, it allows me to go ahead and rely on my brush a little bit more than I would say in other drawings. But here I'm just throwing down a nice base layer. I'm keeping in mind those tones. Anywhere where I know there's going to be a little bit darker of a tone, I am making sure to layer medium charcoal on top of my soft charcoal. And like I said before, if it's not quite the exact match to your reference image, don't worry about that, because we're going to be going in with our eraser and we're going to be basically solidifying through detail work those shadow breaks and those tones. And as we move our way up the forehead, our eraser pulls are going to be longer and longer. Remember, the hair is very short on the forehead, and then it becomes longer as the mane of the lion starts. One of the biggest things to remember about the mane is try to keep your poles as separate from each other as you possibly can, unless there are areas of the mane that require you to have a much lighter tone. The closer your strokes, the lighter the overall tone in that area is going to be. The farther away your strokes are, it's going to hold more charcoal, and thus it's going to give you a darker shade or a darker look. So just keep that in mind. And remember, so much of charcoal drawing is just building layer upon layer upon layer to get your desired effect. So, and now here what we're doing is we're just doing more eraser work. This type of a drawing is definitely going to teach you a lot of eraser skills. As you can see, these strokes are just nice and tight. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just taking my smudger, I'm just pulling some charcoal to give that nice break in the fur underneath the lion's eye. But this technique, one of the reasons why I love the 3-layered method is because it is extremely forgiving, especially if you're just learning charcoal. It allows you to, make mistakes and learn from them, and still have a decent drawing at the end of it. But here, the biggest thing about this detail work with the eraser is just making sure that your strokes are short, that they're deliberate, and they're evenly spaced. That's the biggest thing. A lot of times, if your strokes are not evenly spaced, and if you're not following the underlying form of your image, it won't look as good as you want it to. But now here for the nose, what we're doing is we're just taking some medium charcoal, and I'm just lining out the front part of the nose and the nostril. And this is one of those things where you don't really see this in the reference image, but the nose, even though it's dark in the reference image, that whole section of the left nostril of the lion isn't completely black. In fact, there's actually a side portion right here where I'm hitting this with a smudger. This side portion of the nose, even though I'm going in with my smudger, it actually does look like this in real life. However, the reference image doesn't really do a good job of showing you. So this is one of those classic examples where you're going to put something down in your drawing which actually doesn't show up in the reference image, but it gives your drawing credibility and realism. But here with the smudger, as you can see, this is another way that you can do detail work. You can go in and you can add charcoal in those same short strokes with your smudger as opposed to your eraser. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just taking some hard charcoal and I'm just going in and I'm just more or less softly hitting any portion of the nose that needs to have that really rich dark tone with my hard charcoal. And then I'm just highlighting all the spots that I hit with my charcoal pencil, and this gives the nose that same aesthetic that it has in the reference image. I mean, and this is more or less detail work. I mean, you can spend hours on detail work, but for the sake of this video, I'm just showing you the basic principles of it and then moving on. But then here for the nose, we're just following the form. So as you can see, the hair on the nose lays a certain way as opposed to underneath the eye. Underneath the eye, it's laying and swooshing back towards the mane, where the nose, it's laying and swooshing down towards the nose. That's that underlying form. Something that you need to keep in mind with every stroke of your pencil, smudger, and brush. But now here what we're doing is I'm just going in and I am laying down the base layer of the whiskers and the cheeks of the lion. And this is one of those steps where I'm essentially just building all the tones and really getting that wide variation of value in this drawing. And then here to convey the roundness of the face, I'm just going to hit this real quick, just like that. Boom. A lot of times these tones are something that your viewer will subconsciously see, but it's your job as the artist to understand these and understand exactly where to put them. Okay. So now that we have that base layer, we're going to go in with our Mono Zero eraser. And we're just highlighting any places that need a lighter look or that textured look with our eraser. But one of the biggest things when it comes to this detail work is just understanding where you're pulling. You don't want to pull everything the same way, because then that's not going to give your drawing credibility, because it's not going to look realistic. It's not going to look like the reference photo. Remember, every single action that you take on the paper, whether that's where you're adding detail work like this with the eraser, or laying down a defined line, or using brushwork, needs to have the underlying form of the image in mind. But here for the cheeks, you can pull down, you can pull up. Basically what I'm just doing is I'm making sure that I'm conveying that same hairy texture in the cheeks of the lion here. Okay. But now I'm going to take my 3/16 smudger. And I like to use the smudger here because it allows for so much more control, so much more than the brush. And this is more of a refined approach to detail work. As you can see, you can add different tone breaks. I'm adding where the whiskers come out of the cheeks here with the smudger. And I just like this look. But then we're going to go in and we're just going to hit it real soft, real light. Just boom. Hit it with our brush. That's going to blend those tone differences. And now here, this is what I was saying about the graphite outline. I don't like any of this, so I'm going to erase it. And then I'm going to take my graphite pencil and I'm just going to very quickly just outline the tongue and where I want the teeth to go. Now that my drawing is a little bit more refined and I have a little bit more structure as opposed to just throwing something down. But now we're going to take that smudger, and because this is a smaller area and there's not a lot of room to mess up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lay down all of this foundational charcoal with my smudger, and I'm going to use a brush. But just real light, and remember, the harder you push, the darker on that tone will be, because you're really smudging that charcoal into the paper. But for an initial layer, you just have to barely hit it. That's one of the reasons why I love this mixed media paper with my approach, is because it works very well. But now I'm just going to take some medium charcoal. And if you actually look at the reference image, you can see all of the different tone breaks within the mouth, especially back behind the teeth, where the tongue is laying. Then there's the side of the mouth. I'm just going to put a quick defined line on the tooth here. There we are. Okay. And then here, I'm just going to line out the top of the cheek. Put a defined line on the tooth here. There we are, this big canine. And then just very, very lightly, just packing in the dark tones. And I'm just highlighting the teeth. Remember, you can always add more charcoal, so. And then also, if it looks gritty and you don't like that gritty texture that we have here, we lay it down with when we lay down the medium charcoal, don't worry about that. I'm going to be going in and I'm going to be hitting this with a smudger, and so it's going to blend it and give us that nice gradation and that nice smooth look. So here we are. We'll take this 3/16, and I'm sticking to where I laid the charcoal down. Any mid-tones that I need to hit, I'll just go ahead and pull that charcoal from other areas, but there's no need to actually lay it down. And we're just pulling up and down and making sure that we're not overworking the mouth. That's the big thing here. But now I'm going to take a hard charcoal and I'm just going to pack in where I'm going to have the richest dark tones. And remember, so much of the time when it comes to detail work, less is truly more. The last thing you want to do is pack in too much charcoal, and then you have this extremely dark mouth that doesn't have a lot of value in it in the wake of the scale of white to dark, and it's more or less just a black blob. That's what we don't want. So by going in and just using hard charcoal in key points and then using our smudger work, we can get a really, really nice look that is fairly realistic to the reference image. So now I don't like any of this, so I'm just going to kind of reset. I'm going to hit it all with my Pentel Click Eraser. And then I'm going in with my graphite pencil. And I'm just laying out a nice framework for where I'm going to be laying out a lot of charcoal. Now, as you can see, the mane here on this side of the lion is a little different than the mane that we've already laid down. It's clumping together a little bit more, almost slightly dready, if you will. And so I'm going to show you a really cool technique here to be able to convey that kind of look onto the paper. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our smudger, we're going to do a tone check real quick. I like that. And now starting from the mouth, we're going to pull down. Just pull down. And make sure when you're pulling, as you pull on the paper, you move over and then pull again so that you have a nice break. And when it comes to soft textures, start off slow and then continue to build versus just piling on a bunch of charcoal. And then here, if you don't like anything, you can go ahead and you can hit it with a mono zero eraser real quick. That'll lighten that up. And then you can go in and you can reaffirm the kind of tone breaks and whatnot that you need. But this is one of the reasons why I love the mono zero eraser and this approach, is because if you do mess up, you can go back and fix things fairly easily. But here I'm just going through with my smudger and I'm just adding more charcoal, and I'm just keeping those nice short throws on my detail work. Okay. All right, do a little tone check. And then here what I'm doing is I'm focusing, just like on the face and the forehead of the lion, I'm focusing on the darkest spots first. So as you can see in the reference image, there's a spot here that's very dark, and it's the underlying mane below the mane that sits on top, which is lighter. So this is how I like to approach this lion's mane. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do those dark tones underneath, and then I can do some nice mid-tones on top, and of course I'll hit those with my Mono Zero eraser and give it the detail that it needs. And this mane's going to pop very nicely for us. Okay. But one of the reasons why I'm using the smudger in this case is because I like the control. As you can see here, I just hit it real quick, boom, boom, then I pull down. And then pretty much anywhere where there is clumps of hair, I'm highlighting those more or less with my charcoal. And what this is doing is this is subconsciously conveying to the viewer those different levels of hair. If you look at the reference image, there's shorter hair, and then the hair progressively gets longer and longer, but it drops level, almost like on a staircase. So it's hair that's laying on top of hair that's laying on top of hair. So the only way that we're going to be able to convey that look with charcoal is through variations in tone. So our lighter tones are going to sit on top of our mid-tones, which are going to sit on top of our darkest tones. And this is more or less how we're getting this look. We're just pulling real light with our smudger. And then anywhere where we need the tones to be a little darker, we can push and bring our strokes closer together, just like this here. And then what that's doing is that is giving us that look I was talking about, where hair is laying on top of hair, lighter value on top of a mid value that's on top of the darkest value. And if it looks a little too rough, don't worry about that. Because now we're going to take our brush, a good old brush, and we're going to start blending this. And what I'm doing here is I'm just building all of those dark tones up. I'm softening them up simultaneously with the brush here. I'm just pulling the charcoal sideways, and then if I need to make it a little darker, I can take my brush sideways and pull it like this. There we go. And that gives us a really nice look, and this also allows us to move fairly quickly. But I mean, if you want a softer mane, it just requires more time and more brushwork. But I like the look of this. And here what we're doing is we're just building up any shadows that need to be a little darker. Just hit them real lightly with our brush. And as you can see, that does keep a lot of our eraser work, while at the same time allowing us to build up those shadows. There we go. So now we're just going to take some more soft charcoal. We're just going to build up the rest of the mane here on the bottom. Just short little pulls. There we are. Just like that. And as you can see, that definitely softens it up and gives us a really nice look. But for any areas that need to be darker, just go ahead and hit those real quick. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our Mono Zero eraser, and anywhere that we need to have short strokes for the fur, we'll just go ahead and hit that real quick. But here is kind of the trick with this drawing. What I'm doing is I'm taking my Mono Zero eraser and I'm pulling line work, and I'm trying to make sure that there's space between each pull. If there's too much space, I can always go back in and I can do another eraser pull for another string of hair. So it's much like when you lay down charcoal. Don't add too much because you can always add more, versus if you put too much, you're going to find yourself adding more charcoal because you have a bunch of white tones with no breaks in it, and thus it doesn't look like hair. But I mean, this is pretty much just the technique here, just real light. Of course, the harder you push on each of your strokes, the lighter that tone will be, and the more charcoal you'll take off with the paper. But here, if you need to build any of this up, you can go ahead and build that. See how that keeps that really nice shadow, but we're still able to convey detail work. There we go. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take some medium charcoal. And this is one of the reasons why I said if it looks a little bit too harsh, don't worry about that, because now we're going in and we're going to soften this up. We're basically building any shadows that we need to. There we are. And as you can see, when I hit this with a brush, it still keeps all of that eraser work. But here, if you have any dark tones, these are some of the darkest. If you look in the reference image, you can see where the hair kind of clumps together and you have really, really dark streaks within the hair that rests on the bottom of all the other hair as the mane progressively gets farther and farther away from the lion's face. So that's a quick little trick that you can use to convey that look. Then you can go through with your Mono Zero eraser and you can just make sure you hit it with your short pulls. And you could honestly spend hours on this step, but for the sake of this video, because I'm trying to do about 14 hours worth of drawing in the span of an hour, I have to move very quickly, so I can only show you the initial approach versus the refined look by just doing that approach over the course of hours versus minutes. But here, I'm just loading up on some medium charcoal that has more binder in it than the soft charcoal, so thus it conveys a darker tone. And I'm focusing on all the spots in the mane where that tone is darker. And I'm just slowly building that up. And as you can see, when I hit the sides of these lighter tone breaks, it gives the hair that clumpy look. And that is a really quick way that you can convey that type of look in a lion's mane in your drawings. Your brush is your friend. I've always said that. And this is one of the reasons why. But the more tone breaks you have from light to dark, the more variation you'll have in your lion's mane, and your viewers will really, really like that. But here I'm just going through just very lightly, and I'm just clumping more or less a lot of charcoal together like this here. Just in a short little pull, just like that. And that's really all you have to do. And that gives the hair that almost like that matted look. And of course that makes the hair look like it's laying on top of more hair. And that gives us the look that the lion has in the reference image. Okay, now here, what we're doing is we're just softening up the chin of the lion. Just going through and we're just building and building and building and softening up a lot of this mane. And now we're going to go through and we're just going to do some quick pulls. There we are. And just like with the mouth, less is truly more. You know, eraser work is extremely powerful, and depending on how realistic you're wanting to go, I mean, you can spend hours and hours on eraser work, especially with this technique. But for me, I find that less is truly more, especially with the mane. Now here's a quick trick on these to make them look a little bit more realistic. You can just come off the edges and then just pull and just kind of whip it out. And that gives it the same kind of aesthetic that the mane has in the reference image. Then here we're just taking the smudger and we're just beefing up any darker areas within our darker tones within the mane. And this is just to give it a more realistic look. I'm just working on the edges, trying to get some different tone breaks. And here's a quick little trick you can use as well. You can go in and you can just do quick little pulls, short throws, much like the kind of hand motion that we used with our erasers. And this just gives the lion a little bit more of a realistic look. You can go in and beef up any detail work. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically just adding to that variation on the value scale, which really is the key to making any drawing kind of jump off the paper, and it doesn't look so one note or so monotone. Now here what I'm doing is I'm just adding. There's some hair that's kind of clumped up underneath the lion's chin. So see how this is all kind of one note right now? There's no real separation. The chin doesn't look like it's coming forward in the drawing. I'll show you how to fix that here in a second. I'm just going to go through and hit all this with our smudger. And this just goes to show you how powerful the smudger is, and one of the reasons why I use smudgers more than I even use brushes is because I'm able to just do a lot of detail work and add a lot of tone value within my drawing extremely quickly. And I can have max control, which I really like. But here's the big thing, is just going through nice short little throws. And the more time you spend on it, of course, the more detail you will convey. Okay. So now I'm just taking my Mono Zero eraser, just lightening up any values that need to be lightened up. Real short, light throws. Remember, the eraser is extremely powerful. It's just as powerful, and in some cases even more powerful than the charcoal itself. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now this is a prime example of something that doesn't actually show through in the reference image, but we need to do it with charcoal to bring that chin forward. So what I'm doing is I'm darkening up the underside of the chin where the mane is at, but while leaving the chin of the lion predominantly lighter. And what this does is draws the chin forward, and thus makes it look more like the reference image. Okay. And now I'm just going through with my hard charcoal, just ironing out any subtle details in my drawing. Here we need to add the whiskers to this kitty cat. There we are. Some of the whiskers in this reference image start off dark, so we just want to take some hard charcoal. There's no need to layer this because it is just fine detail work. Then here we have some clumps of the mane that have kind of come together, probably from water or something that the lion ate. And now I'm going to take my Mono Zero eraser. I'm just going to hit this real quick. Be sure when you're doing whiskers that you're very, very abrupt. Put the eraser down on the paper and then just pull it. Just be committed from the beginning of the stroke all the way to the end and lift up as you pull. And that'll give you that nice look. That's pretty much it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And there you are. Voila.
That is my process. It's by no means the only process. It's just a process that I've identified over the years of drawing a lot, and one that I just enjoy. But you know, I mean, if you're just starting out with cats, or maybe if cats tend to be your Achilles heel, like they've been for me in the past, don't worry about that. Just focus on your next piece. Whatever your next piece is, try to learn and gather up as much information as you can, whether that's techniques from other artists, or maybe techniques that you've developed yourself, and just apply them. And I promise, your drawings will get better. So, having said all that, that is it. That is all I got for you guys in this one. And remember, if you guys enjoyed this video and you find yourself enjoying all of our videos, be sure to like this video. When you subscribe to the channel, you hit the bell for notifications. Ding! Yes. And then that way you can be notified when our latest and our greatest videos come out. Also, remember, we're on Patreon now, so definitely check us out there, where we're offering exclusive content offerings, things like early access to our videos, poll voting for future video ideas, and stuff like that. So, my name is Braden. You guys have just been tipped off. Hope you guys had fun, and I will see you in the next one.